Dare to enter Crow's Quill's books, where tales of forgotten realms and fearless souls come alive. Today's journey, Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals, chapters 27 to 28, by Mark and James Lindsay. Will you uncover the truth hidden in the shadows? Chapter 27. They were now all back at the riverside landing strip where Plato's plane sat. Along the way back, they had picked up additional supplies from Huyn's pirate crew, where he gave his second-in-command instructions in a stern, whispered tone. His men then departed. Captain Schmidt and his men then helped them load their supplies aboard the plane. I don't pretend to understand everything that's going on. All I know is that it holds the future of this proud country in the balance. So, for your sakes and that of my family, I hope you're successful, Captain Schmidt said. We can't thank you enough, Robert. You've been a true friend, Plato said, and shook the captain's hand. My men have been instructed to leave you and your crew alone, Huyn said, with a nod. Bion stepped forward and kissed his cheek. Luck to you and your family, Bion said, and the captain blushed, then waved his goodbye. 20 minutes later, they were in the air and headed for Saigon, with Luther at the helm. Plato went back to confer with his crew, which was now a +1. The pirate, Huyn. We should arrive in the next 2 hours. Plenty of time to work out what comes next, Plato said, taking a sip of water from his canteen. The map says Chudong-tu lies in the People's Market, at the point where the day's trade ends during the Moon Festival, Bion said. What does that mean? Plato asked. Does that not mean the market itself is the resting place? The market is a vast area. I remember when I was a small boy accompanying my aunt there and getting lost, Huyn said with a rueful smile. Which one? Nat asked. Which one? What do you mean? Plato asked. When you first mentioned the Saigon market, I naturally assumed you were talking about the District 1 location. But just then Bion mentioned the People's Market, Nat said. Explain, Plato said. I swear I didn't even think of it till just now, but it makes sense, Nat said. Spit it out, Nat, Plato urged. The District 1 market is the first thing everyone thinks of when people are talking about the markets. But it is literally only a couple of 100 years old, if that. But for nearly 1,000 years, there has been a farmer's market about 40 kilometers west of the city, used predominantly by smaller villages and farmers. This was known as the People's Market. Also, the Moon Festival is tomorrow, Nat said. There was a long silence in the room. Surely you can't believe that this is just coincidence now? Everyone looked towards Plato. Everyone focus, Plato growled. The information about the market changes everything, Bion said. How so? Nat replied. Is this information common knowledge? I doubt General Tun is aware of the real People's Market, Bion said, jubilant at her deduction. Don't make assumptions. Tun and his 2 pet psychopaths are quite resourceful, Plato said, troubled. So what now? Bion asked. The Viper will have his people at both locations, Huyn said. Why both? If he knows about the true location, why bother with District 1? Bion asked. Because of us. He would be aware that we now have the second immortal. They know that we're going to be in one of the 2 locations. Kill us and get the statues, Huyn said. He's right. They get us, and they basically have 3 of the 4 statues. If I know the Viper's reputation, he'll be preparing for the worst. But he's forgetting one important thing, Plato said. And what's that? The other 3 said. Our backs are against the wall, and we're pissed off and dangerous. If you throw something unpredictable into this situation, what have you got? Plato asked. Chaos, Huyin replied with a grin. After a briefing with Luther, they touched down outside Saigon on an isolated private airstrip. The sun was just setting on the horizon, and they were all exhausted from the day's travel. After appropriating some local cuisine, they bunkered down for the night. "So, Hein, what did you whisper to your second-in-command before you left?" Bian asked, through a mouthful of noodles and chicken. "I told him that Captain Schmidt was now a friend to the Red Scorpions and was to be no longer harassed, and he was to carry on the traditions of the Brotherhood after I was gone," Huyin replied. "You make it sound like you won't be returning," Bian said. "I won't. After the war, I wandered for a very long time, without purpose, my family gone, no prospects. Then I fell in with the Scorpions. I know what you're thinking, that's about as far as a man can fall. And to be honest, at the time, I didn't really care what happened to me. But the Scorpions have protected the people on the river for years. Yes, we took money, but we also gave back. Medicine and food have been delivered to certain areas. What I'm trying to say is, I have refound a purpose, giving back. One I think I shall not return from," Huyin said, like a man resigned to his fate. "Bloody hell, I know what we face, but I've seen these two foreigners in action. If anyone can get us through this, it's them," Knot said, clasping his old friend on the shoulder. "I appreciate the vote of confidence," Plato said, "as I do your enthusiasm. But I have prayed to the gods on the matter of my revenge. If they see fit to grant my request, I know there will be a heavy toll, and I'm willing to pay it." Huyin said with finality, "Well, I'm not planning on dying. I'll not put my faith in the gods, but rather planning and my training," Plato said, getting to his feet. "We have a busy day tomorrow. Reveille is 0400 hours. I suggest everyone should get some sleep." As Plato climbed into his hammock, he thought about Huyin's words and how the last few days were beginning to crack through his atheist beliefs. He hoped that his crew would all pull through what now lay ahead. Plato was more tired than he thought, as it was Luther who woke everyone from their slumber, Plato being the last one to rouse himself. He was grateful for the strong coffee that was there to meet him, and after he had the warm brown liquid in his stomach, he set about the enormous task of briefing and preparing for the day ahead. Sitting around the small metal table in the cargo hold, Plato and Luther briefed everyone on their roles, battle plans, and more importantly, contingencies for worst-case scenarios if the need should arise. "Are there any questions?" Plato asked with finality. "I can speak for everyone here by saying, your thorough orders have been extensively relayed and understood," Huyin said. "I don't plan on leaving anything to chance. I'm not willing to risk anyone no matter what their ulterior agenda is," Plato said, giving Huyin notice. "Understood and appreciated," Not cut in. "I do have one question, brother. Where exactly is the resting place of Chudong Tu?" Luther asked. "He's right. The map is fairly ambiguous," Bian added. "Found at the point where the day's trade ends, during the Moon Festival. I take that to mean the office for the official who runs the markets, today being that day," Plato said, looking towards Knot for confirmation. "You're correct that there is an actual office where a market mediator has a post. He basically handles disputes and helps with pricing of commodities. But I don't understand why the time would be a factor, as the location is the same in the morning as it is in the afternoon," Knot replied. "This is the one thing that isn't clear. As much as it pains me to say, we are going to have to sort this problem out on the ground, or even worse, rely on the Viper to know what the next step is," Plato said with disgust. "It really kills you, doesn't it, Peter Perfect? Luther said with a grin. Yes, yes, it does, Plato replied. It was now midday. Plato and Bian were dressed as common villagers, sitting on a small hill overlooking the markets, pretending to be sellers with a cart full of oranges, which Nat had managed to appropriate. They didn't look out of place, as there were others like them who had been unable to get permission for a booth. The location was perfect, as it gave them a clear view of the markets, as well as anyone coming or going. The market area was a massive cobblestone area, wall to wall, with booths selling everything from exotic fruits to local poultry and other farmyard beasts. In the very center was a small stone building with a giant tower seeming to grow out from the roof, nearly 50 meters high. At its peak, a huge circular clock with a yellow stained glass face that could be viewed from either the east or west sides. Plato was wearing a huge woven bamboo hat that covered everything, including his shoulders, to prevent anyone noticing his Western features. Feeling safe in his disguise, he produced a small wood and brass telescope that Huyn had brought with him. It didn't look military, and Plato hoped it wouldn't rouse suspicion. He quickly scanned the marketplace until he found what he was looking for: a large wicker basket located near the center of the market, currently housing the massive form of Luther. A lot of coaxing had gone into getting the big ex-Marine in that basket. The only thing that was not negotiable was the Mag-58 heavy-caliber machine gun currently residing with him. Plato tried to chuckle inconspicuously, but Bian caught on. "What's so funny?" Bian asked. "Just the thought of Luther crammed in that basket," Plato said, trying to pull a serious face and not succeeding. Bian was silent. Then she, too, burst into laughter. Plato thought it sounded captivating. "That's hilarious," Bian said through gales of laughter. Plato couldn't help joining in. Because of the Moon Festival, the markets were busier than normal with festivities planned throughout the day. So the fact that Nat and Huyn were constantly walking around sampling food and other specialties of the day didn't appear out of the ordinary. Their baggy common clothing concealed a vast array of hidden weaponry. Every 20 minutes, each member of the team would check in with Plato through their concealed walkie-talkies. "This is going to be a long day, isn't it?" Bian asked. "I don't mind the boredom. When I was in the Special Air Service, they teach you to keep the mind nimble and alert during periods of inactivity. My biggest problem was the lack of movement followed by sudden intense muscle overload, when your adrenaline would spike so quickly. It's almost like an overload on your senses," Plato said. Bian, who happened to be eating an orange at the time, stopped and frowned. "During the war, a lot of us learnt to hate you soldiers as nothing more than war-mongering buffoons," Bian said. "Most of the soldiers that came here didn't want to. They were kids just trying to survive. Some even protested about it. Lots died and others will never leave," Plato said, mirroring everyone's thoughts. "I know that now. I look at Luther, and I see a wounded man in both mind and spirit. I think he stays out of guilt," Bian said. "He did to begin with, but it's more than that now. This is his home. I doubt he'll ever leave," Plato said. They had been sitting there for hours, waiting impatiently, milling through small talk, tense with the knowledge of what was soon to happen. Plato stared up at the large stained glass face of the market clock and thought, 3:30, half an hour till the deadline hits, and still no sign of the Viper. Maybe he was unaware of the true market, or maybe they were wrong. That was the trouble when you were in charge. If something went pear-shaped, it was all on your head. The combination of heat, fatigue, and worry were starting to take their toll on him as he continued to scan the market area, hoping to find the Viper, then dreading the moment he did. "Huyn, Nat. Anything?" Plato asked over the radio. Nothing so far, Huyn said. Me too. So far, no bad guys, Nat replied. My legs are cramping. If anyone's interested, Luther grumbled. Sorry, buddy. It was the best we could do under the circumstances, Plato commiserated. Plato tossed the radio back into the cart and sighed. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Patience. Everything will be revealed, of that I'm sure, Bian said, and placed her hand over his in a comforting manner. I thought you were like me, the no-nonsense pragmatist, Plato said with a raised eyebrow. That ship has sailed. There has been too much coincidence for me not to believe that there are other forces at work. You can't tell me that you're not coming around to this concept too? Bian asked. I've always believed in my senses, and when things appear out of the ordinary, or appear too good to be true, it's due to other people's manipulation of facts and events, Plato replied. Even what happened with the Cray Sioux. We all had a vision of the Valley of the Immortals. And how can that just be coincidence? Bian asked. We allowed ourselves to be drugged and left open to suggestion. Now, I'm not saying that I wasn't spooked a little bit, but the facts are, while we were under the influence, she could have been saying anything to us. I mean, what's not to say that the whole thing wasn't just orchestrated by General Thun, Plato said. This statement had a profound and unsettling effect on Bian. Do you really believe that's the case with us? Bian asked. Now it was Plato's turn to comfort her. No. I think if the witch was working for Thun, we would all have had our throats cut and been left in the bottom of the river. But it does raise serious questions. Who does she work for? Why help us? And does she have anything to do with the Guild of Wolves? Plato asked. Plato. Plato, a voice over the radio hissed urgently. Plato fumbled for the radio in the orange cart. What have you got? Plato asked. It's him. The Viper, Nat whispered. You sure? Plato asked. He and his men are also dressed as locals, pretty good too. But yes, it's definitely him, Nat said. Your location? Plato asked. I'm located on the east side of the market between a fat vendor selling durians and a beautiful young girl selling dragon fruit, Nat said. Plato trained the telescope onto the described position, and a couple of seconds later he found Nat. I've got you, Plato said. The Viper is at my 3 o'clock moving west. He has 5 men with him, Nat said. Plato switched his gaze to the described location, then cursed under his breath. What's wrong? Bian asked. I'm having trouble seeing him through the vendors and the massive shadow the clock face is casting. Why build it in the first place? Plato stopped mid-sentence. What is it? Bian asked. Nat, stick with him, but keep a comfortable distance. Huyn, you too. No one move on him, Plato instructed. Bian was still waiting on an answer, but Plato's mind was on something else. Placing the telescope down, he stared out at the marketplace, more specifically, the eastern side. What is it? What are you looking for? Bian asked again. Plato was silent with concentration. His thoughts to himself, he continued to scan the area. Then his eyes went wide. That's what I'm looking for. There! Plato exclaimed and pointed toward the area of interest. Bian looked but couldn't work out what he was talking about. I still don't see what you would... Shh. It makes sense now. Remember what the map said. Time stands still only for the true believer. Nat was right. It doesn't make any sense that the statue would only be in a certain spot and at one time of the year, correct? Plato said. Bian nodded, befuddled. But what if only the marker of the statue were present? Plato hinted. I suppose that would make more sense, Bian said. The most important part of the instruction is time. What can you see out there that is important to time? Plato asked. The clock. But it's built over the manager's office. We already assumed that it actually refers to the clock. It must be there. Bian replied. We assumed. Never assume, first rule. We know the date, we know the time. When it comes down to these two important factors, we know that astronomically, things are always spot on, and in this instance, it's the sun, Plato said, gaining confidence in his theory. I'm sorry, I'm still not following, Bian said. It's that big, giant clock, or more importantly, the glass face. In approximately 10 minutes, the sun is going to shine through the face on the perfect angle, and the shadow of the hour hand is going to point exactly on the spot where the statue is hidden, Plato said. Bian let the information wash over her as she absorbed this new possibility. She now turned toward the market with the understanding of what she was supposed to be seeing. Most of the east side of the market was now covered in a large shadow, the shape of a clock face, perfect right down to the details of the numbers and hands. Oh my God, I can see it, Bian whispered. I can see it. What are you going to do? Now for the hard part. I'm going to go down there and get that statue, Plato replied. Chapter 28. After radioing the others, and with minimal explanation, he instructed Huang to tail the Viper and not to meet him in location. Luther had to remain in his present location as emergency backup, something he was not too pleased with. It took Plato several long minutes to get down near where he needed to be. He didn't want to move too quickly and draw attention to himself, as a person running through the marketplace would have seemed highly unusual. Now, on the ground, the task of seeing the hour hand was a lot more difficult than expected, which is why he had left Bian behind to act as a spotter, as she had a better view of the area. Bian, keep talking to me. I need to know exactly the time and the position of the hour hand. Every second is precious. We only have one crack at this, Plato instructed. There was a long pause, and he could feel the anxiety and worry in her lack of reply. You'll be fine. I have faith in you. The time is 3:56. You need to move west 30 meters. Without reply, Plato grabbed Not, and they moved. From up on the hill, the market hadn't seemed too busy, but now, down in the thick of it, Plato found it hard to move through the mass of bodies that made up the merchants and shoppers, and at the same time, not make himself noticeable. They had no more than reached their destination when they received new directions. Time is 3:57. You need to move south 40 meters, Bian instructed. Plato took off with Nhat close behind. Where's the Viper? Nhat asked. Stay with me, Plato said to Nhat, who hurried behind. I've got him, Huin said, but didn't elaborate. An old man pulling a donkey stepped out, and Plato dashed around but was then separated from Nhat, who tried to squeeze by. But the stubborn animal refused to move. Nhat watched helplessly as Plato disappeared in the crowd. For the first time, Huin could now see the Viper and his entourage, pushing their way through the crowd as they moved towards the market manager's office. Though from Huin's perspective, it was more of a plain stone hut. Huin was keeping a respectable distance, knowing that his observation of the Viper was important. A young boy separated from his mother wandered into the path of the six-man squad. Huin watched as the Viper swung with a mighty backhand and struck the child across the head, sending him flying into a heavy wooden cart. Despite being some distance from the scene, Huin knew, from the force of the impact, that the young boy wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. Huin wasn't sure if it was the blow or the detached look of disgust from the Viper that then prompted him to act, but Huin saw red, like a bull, whose temper and size he shared. The stocky pirate moved from his concealed location as he bulldozed through the crowd of onlookers, his scarred face the definition of rage. Plato had just reached the second point, and Bayan was ready for him. Time is 3:58. Move west 30 meters. Hurry, Bayan said. Plato didn't respond, but simply moved with speed and purpose. He had given up on trying to be discreet and was now actively pushing people aside, but even this was proving to be hard. This is taking too long, Plato thought as he was knocked over by two burly individuals who had become physical during a dispute. Plato picked himself up and attempted to double his pace. "I'm here," Plato said. "Time is 3:59, and you need to go south 15 meters, and you're there," Bayan said, her voice trying hard not to show panic. Plato elbowed his way past a farmer moving pigs, the smell and noise of the animals nearly overwhelming Plato's senses. He was just about there, literally meters away. He could now see a pattern on the cobbled stone path, yellow-colored bricks making the image of the Divine One, a large yellow dragon with a scripture scrawled on its back saying Chu Dong Tu. "That's it. You're nearly there. The shadow of the hour hand is right there," Bayan said with relief. At the same time as Plato was nearing the image of Chu Dong Tu, Huin was coming up behind the viper and his men, his face flushed red with fury, his hands clenched into fists. An image of his dead brother flashed through his mind, the look of astonishment on his sibling's face as he died, as if he couldn't believe what had happened. Huin had carried the image all these years, and now with the viper in sight he couldn't seem to control his current course. Now so close with his quarry unaware, Huin drew the heavy-caliber pistol from its holster that had been hidden under his shirt and raised it. Cocking the hammer back, he pointed it at the back of the viper's head, ready to pull the trigger. "Let's see your look of surprise, you murderous bast," Huin thought, and started to gently squeeze the trigger, when a woman's high, piercing shriek cut through the air. Huin hesitated as he realized that the woman was screaming at him and the pistol that he now held. Others joined her as people jumped away from him in horror, some running in front of his path, now partially obscuring his target. As soon as the screaming started, the viper and his men went into defense mode. Unsure if there was a threat or where it was coming from, they all turned. Huin struggled to get a clear shot through the fear-induced mob. Seeing an opportunity, Huin lined up the viper, the pistol's sights finding a spot between the colonel's eyes. He squeezed the trigger, and the gun fired. Plato was literally standing on the spot where the statue of Chu Dong Tu lay, wondering how he was going to unearth it in the middle of a busy marketplace, when he heard a commotion in the distance, then the single shot of a lone pistol. This was immediately followed by the cracking of automatic weapons fire. "Shit!" Plato growled, and pulled out a sawn-off shotgun on a 3-point sling from underneath his ragged-looking cloak. Someone near him screamed, which soon turned into more pandemonium as he raced towards the sound of gunfire. Luther's stay in the basket had done nothing for his temper, so when he heard the gunshots, he knew it was no mere coincidence. Kicking out with his legs, he shattered the thin woven bamboo sides of the basket where he had sat for the last several hours and jumped to his feet. The burning in his legs from being cramped for so long was taking its toll. He glanced around the grounds of the markets. People were running in all directions, trying in vain to get away from the small war zone that had broken out. The air was filled with gunfire and screaming, and despite trying to pretend that he wasn't the same man who thrived on the hunt during the war, his senses kicked in straight away, as if he had never left. Just the burning desire to help his friends pushing him towards combat. He, too, ran towards the carnage. Bian watched helplessly from the top of the hill. She was now completely alone as the vendors beside her had taken off at the first signs of violence. Now, through Huin's telescope, she tried to find her colleagues in the mass riot below. The only thing she could clearly see was the Viper and his men firing blindly into the crowd. Although there was now only 4 men with him. Plato, I can see them. Oh God, they're shooting anything that moves. Bian relayed what she was seeing. I know. I'm nearly there, Plato replied breathlessly. I can't see Huin. Don't worry for now. I'm sure he's all right, Plato said, but in his heart wasn't too sure. When Huin had fired, he had felt a confidence in both his skills and the proximity of the target. He had been totally sure that he was going to get his revenge. Only he hadn't been prepared for one of the Viper's men to selflessly throw himself into the path of the bullet. So instead of the Viper, one of his lackeys had gone down in an explosion of red. Huin's large-caliber pistol not allowing for an open casket funeral. The Viper's men had immediately returned fire, their training exemplary. But what at first had been a hindrance to Huin was now proving to be his savior, as the scared crowd were inadvertently running interference. The Viper and his men not able to get a clear shot at the pirate. Huin, stunned at first, hadn't expected this outcome, believing he would get his revenge and die in the process. Now both outcomes had failed. He hesitated. At first, he had been pushed away by the crowd, then knocked to the ground, where he had nearly been trampled. Only his own quick thinking prevented his death from the stampede of scared villagers. Huin had managed to crawl under a peach cart and hold firm, not sure of what to do next. The Viper now stood in the middle of his 4-man detail, who were all facing out and firing blindly into the crowd. All manner people dropped under the relentless gunfire. Give me a sit rep, the Viper growled dispassionately. No resistance, they're just farmers, one of the men replied, reloading his assault rifle. Who was that man who tried to kill me? The Viper spat. There was no response. I said, who was that man? We don't know, sir, another man answered. Wonderful, the Viper hissed through clenched teeth. So, some nobody manages to come within spitting distance of my person, and only through sheer luck narrowly misses putting a bullet in my head. There was no response from his men as they continued to fire into the crowd. If any of you manage to survive this, there will be repercussions for your poor handling of this situation, the Viper growled. Plato could now see the Viper and his men in the distance, and was horrified to see the ocean of blood and bodies that surrounded the colonel and his men. He frantically tried to find Huin amidst the carnage, but with no success. Even though he knew that his shotgun was not an effective range, he clicked the safety off and lined up a shot and fired. One of the men to the Viper's right was hit, but it was only a minor flesh wound as it stunned him temporarily. Then he continued to fire now in Plato's direction. Plato took cover behind 3 large urns filled with liquid. 40 meters, slight right, one enemy hiding behind those large blue urns. I think it's the Englishman. One of the Viper's security detail yelled out, wincing at the pain in his shoulder from the shotgun pellets. The Viper turned his gaze towards his man's target indication. Keep up the suppressing fire. Don't allow him to get a shot off, the Viper instructed, then gave a signal to one of the others to back the man up while he grabbed the other 2 men and withdrew slowly. The intention was to pull back to a safer area, then flank his quarry. This was going to prove too easy, the Viper thought to himself. That seals today's tale in shadows. We hope Plato Wyngard and the Valley of the Immortals has drawn you deeper into its enigma. Return soon to Crow's Quills books, where the next chapter awaits, whispering secrets yet untold.